Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here with us this morning, and welcome to the fourth lecture of the first series of lectures and workshops by ZHAW, Translation and Industry. The topic of our invited talk today is ergonomic considerations in translation theory and practice. And our guest lecturer is Professor Maureen Ergensberger-Dow. Professor Maureen, PhD, is Professor of Translation Studies in the ZHAW Institute of Translation and Interpreting in Switzerland, and her main research interests are cognitive ergonomics, cognitive load, professional translation workplaces, multilingual text production, translation processes, and various types of digital literacy. She has published on the cognitive ergonomics of language technology, translation processes, and workplace-based research, as well as co-editing the Bloomsbury Companion to Language Industry Studies, 2020. Professor Maureen, thank you for accepting our invitation, and it's with great pleasure that I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. It's very special. I'm speaking from Switzerland. It's a very warm afternoon, and you'll see why things like this are important to me. I'm going to try to do what I was told I could do. I'm going to share my screen with you and then go through the presentation. I hope I'm right in assuming that everyone can see the presentation.
Not yet. I think it's loading.
Waiting.
Okay, now we can see your slides.
I go ahead?
Sure, absolutely. Sorry, Maureen, but we can't hear you.
Now it seems to be coming.
Okay, I guess now it's working.
The information I have is that something is happening. It's not yet ready. Now I'm presenting. According to what I see, the information I have, it looks like I'm presenting, so I shall assume that everything is happening. This is a perfect example of when the technical situation and the environmental situation make something difficult to do, that it causes us stress and cognitive overload. It wasn't planned this way, but it's a nice example. So, ergonomic considerations. The first people in translation and interpreting studies to worry about ergonomic considerations were interpreters. As the sign language interpreter is having to use her body and follow what I'm saying and immediately interpret it into another modality, spoken language interpreters work in small booths They have headphones, as do many of us now. We're getting a better idea of what kind of conditions they have been working under. And there was a workload study done in 2002 discussing some of the issues like temperature in the booth, lighting, speed of speech, and so on. Translation studies was a bit slower to take up these concerns. There was an article published in the American Translator Association's newsletters on why ergonomics matters to professional translators, in which Sharon O'Brien from Dublin City University and I discussed some findings with freelance translators. And people now are becoming interested in ergonomics in translator and interpreter training. And there's a special issue of the interpreter and translator trainer coming out later this year with contributions that discuss various aspects. When I ask you to think about what comes to mind when you consider ergonomics at the workplace, what comes to mind? I asked this question in a webinar that I did with British translators, and these are some of the answers that they gave me. They think of their chair, they think of comfort, they think of posture, they think of the desk, they think of their back pain, they think of productivity. But as you can see from the screen, the different words on the screen, they think of lots more things. And what I would like to do in the next 30 minutes or so is to talk about what the Ergonomic Association understands by ergonomics and how it applies to translation theory and practice. The International Ergonomics Association breaks ergonomics into at least 3 parts. Physical ergonomics, which is what many of us think of when we think of ergonomics. And as we saw from that word cloud, things like the chair and the posture. But cognitive ergonomics is also important. So are we able to do our thinking work well, or are things getting in our way, as it did at the beginning of this presentation, where my presentation seemed to be a bit too heavy for transmission? Organizational aspects are also important. How does a team work together? Does a translator have the information he or she needs to get her job done? Are things organized in a way that's conducive to work? All of these go into ergonomics, which basically is the science of work with people in the center. But there's more. We can think of it in terms of translation. All of these things feed into quality. So if physical aspects are not right, then quality will suffer. If I'm tired or hungry or thirsty or uncomfortably hot, that could affect my decision making, and I might make poorer translation choices. If the screen I'm working on, I've given an example here of a computer-aided translation tool, a CAT tool that's very, very popular in Europe. Decision making as well. So translation as a cognitive act. And as I mentioned, if a translator's work is not very well valued, it's always last minute, time pressure, maybe the deadlines are not even clear, translators are not given the background materials they need to do a good job, they're not given the preparation they need to do a good job, all of those things will affect quality as well. You can also think about environmental aspects. Some of those physical aspects I mentioned, you could call more environmental aspects. So the temperature of the room, but also if I'm sitting in a room, a big office with lots of other people, if it's noisy, people are having phone conversations right next to me as I'm trying to concentrate. Social aspects, if I hate the person who's working next to me, or if my boss, who I feel uncomfortable with, is working next to me and is looking at my screen all of the time, or in a more positive view, if I of these things can contribute to quality. We would also argue they contribute to health and job satisfaction. If you have people who feel good in the job that they're doing, in the environment that they're in, they're going to produce better work and they're going to probably stay longer, which is good for the organization. We can put this in the context of translation theory. So translation as a cognitive act has been talked about for quite a while. For a long time, people talked about translation as a thing, a text out there. More recently, we've become interested in the translator, what the translator is doing, the decisions the translator is making. But there's been a recognition by people like Chesterman and Turi that that's not in isolation, that all of us are operating within what we called a sociological event that involves various actors and factors. Those actors can include the person who sends the commission, who may or may not be the end user of a translation. So you have to think about pleasing your client, pleasing the commissioner, pleasing the target audience, being loyal to the message of the source text. All of these actors and the factors have to do with those ergonomic considerations I mentioned. So not only is this important for translation practice, but also for translation theory. And what I'd like to do now is go through one by one: physical ergonomics, cognitive ergonomics, and organizational ergonomics, and give you examples from our research with professional translators to give you a better idea of how this might apply to your own practice if you're a practicing translator or interpreter, or how it might apply to your future if you're a student, or if you're a teacher, a trainer, or an instructor, how you might think about talking about these things with your students. And if you're an employer, the things you might want to think about improving in the workplace. Physical ergonomics. This is a bad practice example. That's why it's in red. I don't know if you recognize yourself in this picture. When I give live presentations, people often laugh when I show this slide because they can imagine people start to sit up a little bit straighter. It's morning your time, it's afternoon my time, and I've come out about 6 hours of meetings. So that's what I'm looking like a little bit if I don't think about sitting upright. Good practice is more like this. And these good practice recommendations are all over the place. You can do a search in the internet in almost every language, and you can find good practice recommendations for doing computer work, sitting at a desk. And some of these things look like they might be expensive to implement, but there are very economical ways, very cheap ways of implementing some changes that can be very good. So what I'd like to show you are the results of ergonomic assessments that colleagues of mine from occupational therapy, researchers from occupational therapy, occupational health, did a project with us. And they went to professional translators' workplaces and examined various aspects. And the positive aspects is that the translators that they investigated and did assessments of had a dedicated workspace. And I have to say that the people who volunteered to be part of this project were interested in ergonomics. Otherwise, they wouldn't have volunteered to be part of the project. So they probably already had an awareness of ergonomics. So all of these people had a dedicated workplace. Those of you listening, do you have a dedicated workplace? Or do you work sort of wherever? Do you just work on a little laptop and open it, use it on the bus? People work in all kinds of spots. So these were positive things about our particular sample. The desk size was big enough, the chair was adjustable, and there was enough leg room, which is really important for the health of legs and muscles. We tend to think about shoulders and back and neck when we think about ergonomics, but in fact, when we sit a long time, our knees and legs are at risk of health problems as well. You might not be surprised, there were bad things as well. So although people had a desk the right size, the elbows usually were not level with the desk. That angle long term can cause all kinds of problems. The desk height wasn't adjustable, which meant people were adjusting their body to fit the desk instead of the other way around. We're not all the same size and shape. So a desk that's designed for a tall, heavy man is not going to be the right size for someone who is small and slender. The chair, although most people had adjustable chairs, and I think probably were quite proud that they had them, they weren't adjusted properly for the person sitting in it. And again, it doesn't take that much effort to look on the internet to find a good site to tell you how to adjust it. But basically, the lower back should be supported. And they just hadn't adjusted it properly for them. Footrests were rarely being used. Very simple to put a book on the floor and put your feet on the book so that your knees are perpendicular. Your lower legs are perpendicular to your upper legs. Those are the kinds of adjustments that can be made very easily. No control over temperature. That's harder. I don't have air conditioning. It's a very hot day today, but I can open windows. I can try to get a breeze going. Lots of people, though, have no control over temperature. And another negative aspect is that people were moving around in the background, which was very disturbing. I'm working from home right now. It looks like some of you are as well. Probably that's less of an issue. But for people who work in busy offices, that can be very disturbing. So the risks are accuracy, translation quality, and absenteeism. If people's health getting infected, they stop showing up for work as much as they should. The good practice indications here are all in green. So using a desktop for most translation work, a desktop computer, using a keyboard. The reason I say that is because a laptop is there's always something wrong with a laptop. Either the screen is too low and the keyboard is in the right position, or the keyboard is too high and the screen is in the right position for the eyes. If you use a desktop or an external monitor and a separate keyboard, you can make those adjustments to suit your body. Again, going back to the idea that we're not all standard size and shape. The keyboard should be flat on the desk. This used to be, the recommendation used to be to have it at an angle, and people realized that was putting strain on the wrists, and there were lots of carpal tunnel syndrome problems afterwards. Keyboard shortcuts, here we're getting more into translation activity. So using keyboard shortcuts. Learning anything takes some effort. And so some people say, oh, I can never remember those. But other people have the keyboard shortcuts that they want to use on a Post-it next to their desk, because using those is much better for your hands and wrist and your neck and your shoulders than always using the menu. Having two screens for translation work is really important. It's very difficult to get all of the information on one screen. Good practice workplaces we investigated tended to have one screen for research work and the other screen for translation work. Maybe on the research computer, there would also be email open on the side, ideally turned off until you really wanted a break, but at least having two screens. 3 screens happens. Sometimes more than 3 screens seems to be a bad idea. At least one screen should be directly in front of you, about an arm's length away. So if you're sitting at your computer screen, you can start doing these tests right now. The screen should be larger than, this is a standard paper size in Europe, A4, so 20 by 30 centimeters. And if you just think of the standard page for a letter, If your screen is larger than that, you're probably okay. If it's smaller than that, you're probably in trouble long term. You're spending long hours in front of a computer, which is what a lot of translators do. And the magnification of the screen should be adjusted to suit your needs. It's very easy to adjust that, but it surprised us how few people did. This was an international survey. These questions are part of an international survey we did. We had a total of 1,850 responses, and you can see from the color code, although these seemed like all a good idea, they weren't always being observed. And the things in red are things that, of those 1,850 people, lots of people were not doing. This survey went worldwide. It didn't quite go viral. That would have been nice, but we were surprised at how many responses we got. We also had a lot of people writing to us separately and thanking us for doing this work because they realized ergonomics is something important for themselves. The things I've marked in green look like they're not a problem. The things I've marked in yellow look like a warning. So it means of this sample of 1,850 people, maybe there are some people who should really think about setting up their workplace differently. I pulled out the responses from Brazil. There were 70 responses from Brazil, and you can see the profile is a bit different. There are a couple more things to worry about in Brazil. It seems a lot of people are not using a desktop for their translation work. Keyboard isn't flat on their desk. They're not using two screens. Very few people are using two screens, only 19%. And the top of the monitor is not where it should be. Screen, rather small, but at least there's more Brazilians proportionately who are adjusting the magnification. And this is an important theme. Taking responsibility, taking the initiative to make the machine suit you and not the other way around. There are many things that we can do to make our environment more suitable to us. Workplace, I would like this to be more ergonomic because we thought perhaps we weren't getting the complete picture from the questions that we were asking. And I've separated, you'll see these colors into freelancers, institutional translators who work for institutions such as a government office in Europe, in the EU, or in a municipal office, or commercial translators who are working for language service providers. And we see some common themes. For everyone, the chair is a problem, that they would like their chair to be more ergonomic. Room temperature is a problem not for everyone. Freelancers tend to have far more control over their environment, but the institutional translators, the commercial translators are stuck in an office, probably sharing an office with people, and don't have as much control over room temperature, air quality, and noise levels. As again, it's about taking control. The occupational health professionals that we were working with were interested, of course, in health issues. And so that was one of the areas of questions in the survey. Have you had health issues in the last 12 months that you felt were related to translation work? This questionnaire was addressed to professional translators, and one of the first filter questions was, are you a professional translator? And if people said no, they were thanked, and that was the end. So we're quite confident that we tapped into professional translators. And I've ordered things here in the order of frequency. Pain in the neck stiffness. And if you've been sitting for 20 minutes now, you might start to feel a little bit of that. Shoulder pain, that's related to moving the mouse. It's related to clicking the mouse. A lot of times people think that the mouse and keyboarding is just about the fingers. It's not. It's about the whole arm. It's about the shoulders as well. So those are the sorts of things that are highly related to computer activity of any sort, but translators are especially vulnerable because they tend to be sitting still doing intense cognitive activity, going from one language to another, thinking about complicated content, how to best present that. They're not doing mindless tasks, and all parts of their body are at risk. Notice at the bottom, I've also encircled other pain in the joints, muscles, and leg or feet, aches, and heavy legs. So get up, move around, take little breaks every 10, 20 minutes. If you're sitting at your computer right now watching this, pick your computer up and walk around with it if you can. All of those things are going to help your body recover from sedentary activities. If we think about different locations for doing translation work, this is one of our ex-MA students, and the photographs were taken by an MA student who was working for me at the time. I asked her just to take pictures of sort of where she would normally do translation work. These are not all good practices. These are good practices. So we've got actually the one over on the left as well. When she's standing, working on her computer, it's not so bad. Standing, sitting. If you're sitting at your computer, sit with both legs flat on the floor or on a footrest. She's got a separate monitor. She's got a keyboard. Her arms are at a good angle. She stood up then to do revision work, and she stood up at a nearby bookcase. It's not that you have to buy a fancy desk that can go up and down with a power motor. Those exist. They cost a lot of money. You can just stand up to do your work, or shift your computer if you can, move it to a different location. I found a lovely video, but I know that showing videos within videos is not a good idea when you're doing online presentations. So instead, I've given you the URL. It's a lovely video. There's a little bit of music in the background. There are no words, and it shows exactly how you can, with very simple means, change your workplace to make it more ergonomic. So this fellow is not working in an ergonomic setting at all. You can see there are arrows pointing at his neck and shoulders. That's meant to indicate it's painful. I warmly recommend that you take the time after this presentation to have a look at this YouTube video. That's all about physical. So I spent quite a bit of time on physical. That's, as I said, what people think about when they think about ergonomics. It's also the easiest thing to change. So it's worth thinking about it, because if you can't change anything else about your workplace, at least you can make some little changes to give your body a break. Cognitive ergonomics is about mental processes. So perception, memory, reasoning, motor response, and how that feeds into everything that you're doing. Positive aspects, now we're going back to these assessments that the occupational health people did with us of the translation workplaces. The positive makes people struggle, or the hard structures or the complicated input. That's not what people dislike about their jobs. That's what translators love about their jobs, is the linguistic challenges. How can I make this sound good in the other language? Or domain knowledge challenges. When they don't know something about a particular subject matter, they go and research that, and that's the fun part. Interruptions by people. Remember, I said people moving around was not good. That's different from someone saying, "Hi, can I talk to you for a minute?" Because sometimes a break is as good as a rest, and having a person interrupt you in a nice way, that can be good. Cat tools. Although there's been lots of controversy about cat tools, it clearly came out in our research that cat tools were considered something positive. Feedback is also something considered very positive. If people get some feedback, was this a good translation? Was it a bad translation? I also do translation work for my institution, and I received a message yesterday that this choice and that choice were not quite right, and he'd appreciate it next time if we used that choice. Fine, great. And then at the end, nicely, he said it was an excellent translation. That made us feel good, but it was good to get the negative feedback as well, because only from that kind of feedback, critical feedback, can you learn, can you advance. negative aspects, this came out quite often. Poor quality source texts. I don't know about you, but trying to translate a poorly written German text into reasonable English that makes some sense is sometimes a challenge. Linguistic challenge is one thing, but if it's poor quality source text, that's a whole other thing. And we had that comment made a lot. Monotony is also a problem. The more monotonous the work is, the more likely it is people have to exert extra cognitive energy to try to keep alert. This is something we hear often with respect to post-editing machine translation. When it seems to be okay, you really have to concentrate to catch when it's not live or okay, but email interruptions people didn't like. So getting spammed with email, getting lots and lots of email sent that maybe isn't related to what you're doing. Cat tools are good, but there are lots of irritating features of cat tools. So those should be improved. Some of them, we don't have control over that as translators, but some features we can actually change the settings so that they suit us better. Crowded screens, we can hardly see the information that we need, and time pressure. These are all negative aspects having to do with ergonomics. Again, the risks, accuracy, translation quality, and in this case, productivity. If your tools are slowing you down, if a source text slows you down because you can't make sense of it because it's poorly written, this is all going to have an impact on your efficiency and productivity. Turning now to some of the best practice, good practice indications that we explored with the survey. Were cat tools being used? So the information I just showed you was based on live assessments of people's workplaces. This is based on the survey. Cat tools are used for translation. That is good. Cat tools are helpful, at least sometimes. That would be good. Not having to switch from one cat tool to another. That would be good. If you customize aspects of your cat tool, that means you're adjusting the machine to your needs and not the other way around. If you don't find cat tools irritating, that's a good sign. And if no comments were made about cat tool irritations, that would also be a good sign for us. Again, these are the findings from the total sample. So 97% of the people who use cat tools said they were helpful at least sometimes, which is actually, at the time we published these results in 2016, that was a bit new for people because there'd been this general resistance to cat tools. But if at least sometimes they're useful, then we should be using them. But what's worrying in the large sample, people are rarely customizing aspects of their cat tools. The cat tool manufacturers don't always make it easy. That could be part of the problem. Lots of people find it irritating. Notice I've phrased this negatively. So cat tools are not irritating would be good, but only 41% said that. In other words, 59% said that they were irritating. And people gave us lots and lots of comments. So 92% of the people who responded to these questions about cat tools told us what they found irritating. In the Brazilian sample, interestingly, there's a lot less irritation about cat tools. That could be the nature of Brazilians not getting so fussed. What's worrying, though, is there are lots of people who are having to switch from one cat tool to another. There are few people customizing their cat tools, and almost as many are finding them irritating. They're just not telling us what they have found irritating. This survey was available in Portuguese. So thanks to Arlene and her colleagues. So it wasn't that they were not able to give comments or they didn't feel comfortable giving comments in English or German or something. They would have been able to do it in Portuguese. There were not very many comments. But it's still worrying to see how many people are finding them irritating. In our research, we've tried to explore what it is that might be irritating. We evaluated all of those comments and we wrote about that. One of the things with these crowded screens, and you see here, this is a a very popular machine translation up in the left. There are matches from the term bank, term recognition up on the right. The source text in segments is on the left, and the target text, the emerging target text that the translator is working on, is on the right-hand side. And down at the bottom in green is where the translator is actually working. So the focus of attention of that big screen has to be down there when people are entering their target text. On a side note, when the occupational health researchers did the assessments, the ergonomic assessments in the workplace, they couldn't understand why the screens were so high for some of the professional translators. And I was a professional translator colleague who gave me the answer, because he said, I can't see it if it's way down low. So he always kept his screen higher so that where his focus of attention was basically at eye level. That's why when you read ergonomic recommendations about where to put your computer screen, think about where you're looking. Think about the rationale for what they're telling you, and then based on that, think about what's best for you. In any case, we wanted to test this complex user interface with something that's available now, and it's much leaner looking. This is a CAT tool that's a much leaner interface. The source text is given. You can see at the top, there's just one line. It's also segmented, but here instead of a left-right orientation, we have a horizontal orientation with a segment of source text, and then you can put in your target text, and underneath where you're inputting your target text, there's suggestions from machine translation and from translation memory that you can use or ignore as you please. And we asked ourselves whether it might be easier for people to learn how to use this CAT tool and whether it might be more ergonomic than the other one. And we did an eye tracking study where we monitored where are people looking, how much time are they spending looking at the screen with the different setups. It happened, it was partly planned, but it was partly accidental, I have to confess, that in each text that we were using, there was one segment, one really long sentence of 36 words. Compared that 36 word long sentence using that interface with the other interface. And you can see the bright red spot is when there's a concentration of eye attention. So where the eye spends a long time looking. And there's much less movement. It's a much quieter pattern that the sentence being translated, that's where the eye rests, and the eye isn't having to jump back and forth from left to right or up to look at TM segment matches and MT suggestions. So from our findings, this was with students, with MA students, it suggests that at least for beginners, this might be a much more ergonomic interface and might be more effective. We did quality checks, and despite what they thought, because they didn't know this interface as well as they knew the other interface, their productions were better quality. We had external judges judge them. They did them faster, and they had fewer mistakes. So far better productivity using an interface that was more ergonomic. So for us, the ergonomic implications for CAT tools is that maybe less is more, at least for learners. So having leaner interfaces, fewer options, less complicated interface. Having the linguistic resources that you need, like thesaurus or translation memory suggestions or MT suggestions, close to where you're working instead of having to look at different places in the screen. That software developers should make it easier for translators to individualize their settings so that they can choose how to use the tool. People should be empowered to turn off the default settings and choose the alternatives to work for them. And more effort should be put in training in that. We would suggest that translators should be involved in the development and evaluation of these kinds of tools. And that kind of feedback should go into the process. There should be feedback loops in this process in order for, as I've said here, program machines to give humans the space to do what they do best. We're working with some manufacturers. It's hard to get them on board at first, but they're starting to get on board because they're getting tired of complaints from translators and they want to understand more about what the real problems are. I don't know how many of you are software developers, but they seem to think a bit differently from translators. So it's a good idea to get the end users to evaluate these things. Organizational aspects, as I said, have to do with things like where the translator is on the whole cycle, whether an afterthought and they get sent a source text to translate in 5 minutes, or whether they're incorporated in the whole process. And the way I've visualized this here is just sort of where translator actually sits. And these are from our ergonomic assessments, these pictures. The first one, you've got a translator alone in an office, which might be thought of as ideal, might be lonely, but at least in terms of interruptions, it's probably a very good idea. This translator, the desk marked in red, is sharing a workspace with 3 other people, none of whom are translators. So they might be on the phone. You can see that that translator has 2 screens, somebody else has 3 screens, probably a fairly busy office. This one is even more so. So this translator is sharing the office with 7 other people, none of whom were translators. She was the newest in the office, the junior member of the office. And you can desk, that was the entrance. And the entrance was only accessible with a special security card or a key, or that translator, being the junior one in the office, had to stand up and open the door anytime somebody wanted to come in. You can imagine how interrupted her work processes were. So that's organizational ergonomics. Does it make sense that that person who is doing that kind of concentrated work is the person who has to keep jumping up to open the door? In the interviews that we had with people about their workplaces, they talked about positive aspects, personal contact, remote contact, having breaks that are institutionalized. In other words, I have to go for coffee break. Nobody's going to look at me as lazy if I go for coffee break because it's supposed to happen. Job security, of course, being able to decide when to work, flexible working time, and again, feedback. I stress feedback because it keeps coming up. Workflow design is a problem though, technical problems these days when so many of us are working remotely. Infrastructure procurement, where a decision is made about a new CAT tool, translators aren't consulted. You might be surprised how often that happens, that somebody in management decides, oh, this sounds like a cool tool, let's get it in, and the translators have to deal with it. Unrealistic deadlines, translation quality policies, where things just good enough are being sent out, and the translator is very unhappy with that because that's not part of their self-image to do just good enough, and low appreciation. These are all concerns, and the risk associated with these are company loyalty. If you don't feel good about where you're working, if you don't feel appreciated, it's unlikely you're going to stay very long. And organizational development is at risk because people are not going to contribute to the organizational growth. We had lots of questions about this in the survey. Some of them were very technical: internet connection, communication, workflow software, resources, feedback being provided, deadlines being clear. Time pressure is okay, but it shouldn't be mostly or always. Timing of breaks happening at least sometimes, and hourly breaks at least sometimes. All of these would be good practice indications. In the big sample, there are areas of concern. So workflow software is not being used, and that could be a huge help, much better ergonomically than constantly trying to find files and whatnot. Time pressure is a problem with the big sample. And if we look at the Brazilian results, there are more things of concern. Resources are not being provided, at least with our sample of Brazilian translators who answered the survey. Very little feedback and just as much time pressure as in the main sample. So certain things seem to be okay. There's lots of green here, but there's certainly some potential for improvement. Based on our research, we've put together some practical advice. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, using shortcut keys, use arrows as well to reduce your mouse activity. A mouse seems like such a handy device, but it really is not good for the rest of our body. Turn off your email unless you really have to have it on. People are very bad at ignoring distractions. So it's in your interest to keep the workplace distractions to a minimum, and you have control over that. You can increase the frequency of mini breaks. I often hear freelance translators complain that they have to keep email on because an important job might be coming in, but you can have a break every 15 minutes to quickly check your email. But if you have your email on all the time, then you might be constantly watching to see if something comes in. And we have eye tracking data that confirms that people are constantly checking over to their email to see if something's coming in, which means they can't concentrate fully. And a very simple thing that doesn't cost any money at all is to start paying more attention to your body. So to reread something, that means your body needs a break. Stand up, stretch, look out a window. That gives your eyes a rest from looking at the computer, and it might reduce computer vision problems. Just little things like that. If you feel hungry, go and eat something. If you feel thirsty, drink something. Your body is telling you it needs a break. Your brain is part of your body. Your brain's not going to work properly if it's concentrating so hard on suppressing all those other needs. So reflect and act on your own feedback mechanisms. Your body has lots of feedback mechanisms, but if you suppress them all the time, that's not very useful. Change your position. So stretch, as I said, stretch your shoulders, sit up more, stand up to do a revision, and take ownership of technology. Make it yours instead of having the machine run you. So adjust the default settings of the software, especially the software that you use a lot. So just by paying more attention to the ergonomics of your workplace, you'll probably make little changes that's going to improve productivity and improve job satisfaction. Language technology developers, we tell them, please talk to users and professional users. It's fine to talk to students, but students aren't out there yet. They don't really know what the workplace is all about. So talk to professionals before, during, and after you develop the tools. Test the new functionalities with translators and interpreters at the workplace. And make it easier for people to individualize their settings, because right now, sometimes it's very difficult to turn off the defaults. I think some software developers think that we're all idiots and they better make everything difficult to change because we're going to mess it up. But this is not a good idea for people who are dependent on that kind of software. And recommendations for employers and educators is talk about these issues. Talk about the issues to your staff and to your students. Coming back to the theory part, we've got translation in the center. We've got cognitive, physical, organizational conditions. It's all embedded in social and environmental conditions. We can also say temporal, spatial, societal, and discursive conditions. I would argue, and I think Eleni would, and lots of those of us involved in translation process research, that translation is a situated, embedded, embodied activity. And ergonomics is about worrying about the body. This work was done with the generous support of the Swiss National Science Foundation, industry partners, institutional partners, lots and lots of participants, students at the ZHAW where I am, and lots of colleagues helped with this research. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your comments, if you have any questions, and if you want to share any experiences. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you very much for this outstanding presentation. I think it was very interesting to all of us to hear about the impact of ergonomics, especially on translation quality and accuracy, but also on our physical well-being. I think this is while I was listening to you, I was just monitoring and adjusting my body here and paying attention, because sometimes we are not aware of it and we simply start changing our position and then we just feel the pain at the end of the day. So it was very nice to remember this again. And I'm sure that for the audience, this might be the first time they have maybe considered or they became aware of this. I believe the audience also could benefit immediately from some of your recommendations, some of your practical advice, because some of them are free. We don't need a lot of money to do that. We just need to adjust. And I think that your presentation made us aware of these ergonomic aspects, and we might have never considered before. So now we have some time, around 20 minutes, for questions and answers. So the audience that is here could ask you questions. And we have the first question here. Just let me see here. Just give me a second. So the first question is from Veruska. And she asked, what do you think about those corsets for posture correction?
I don't have any personal experience with them. If they're advised by medical professionals to help, then I don't see anything wrong with them. It's certainly anything that will prevent you from having a long-term back problem if you're having to sit at a computer is to be welcomed.
And now I have a question that I was just wondering here while we were presenting. Have your team investigated, or is there any research about the relationship between translators' feelings? I mean, if they have any emotional issues at that moment when they are translating. So if there is a relationship or an impact of this on physical pain and even in productivity.
One of the members of my team, Caroline Lehr, does a lot of work on emotions and the effect of emotions on stress levels, on accuracy. So I would advise you to look into her work. We didn't explore that in our work. We were very much interested in physical aspects and health aspects. And we didn't explore stress. But stress emotions are things that we're exploring in a new project that's called Cognitive Load in Interpreting and Translating. And so we're following up on this idea of poor quality source texts, because that can trigger a lot of emotions.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll have a look, because I suspect it might have a huge impact.
We know that from interpreting in crisis situations, that emotional load is so high sometimes that the interpreters themselves risk having post-traumatic distress disorder. So we know that emotion certainly has an effect. With translators, there's a bit more distance. And people talk about getting up and going for a walk. If they're translating something that's very emotional content, I don't know about a child being tortured, they have to get up and move around. And again, the body can offload some of that emotion sometimes.
Yeah, I think this is quite interesting to learn a little bit more, because especially at this moment that most of us are working from home, I think that many professionals, not only translators, but also professors and other professionals, we are experiencing this kind of emotions, because sometimes we are working from home and then we have some family issues and sometimes even issues in our neighborhoods that they might affect us and affect the work. So just let me see if we have any more questions here from the audience. Well, we have some positive comments here about your presentation. People were thanking you for this very nice presentation. Such an amazing and detailed study, full of useful and practical insights. This is from Caroline. She is a translator.
Great.
They are thanking you. Most of the comments here are thanking for this very nice talk, and especially for the practical comments and recommendations for translators. Because one of the purposes of one of the objectives of this series of workshops and lectures was to direct our talks to translators. Because
great.
usually we have many academic events. So the purpose here was to talk to the translators directly. So if we don't have any other questions from the audience, I think we could finish here. So thank you again, Maureen, for sharing your expertise in the area of ergonomics and for sharing this insightful data with us. Thank you for the interpreters for interpreting this into Brazilian Sign Language. They were very brave to do that. And thank you for the audience. And I invite you for the workshop we are going to have in the afternoon, that it's about meditation and well-being. So everybody is invited.
Nice.
Yes, so we are going to take care of our body and our mind in the afternoon. So you were all invited. So thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Goodbye.